Good evening. My name is Rob Lydon. I'm a Director Emeritus here at the Center, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 7th Chatham Marconi Speaker Series presentation of 2025. Buck Baley is going to be telling us about the history and origins of the Coast Guard, in particular as it relates to Massachusetts and the Cape, as well as some history and contents of the Coast Guard Heritage Museum, which you'll hear more about. Buck is a retired U.S. Coast Guard officer living on Cape Cod and is a volunteer at the museum, the Heritage Museum, located in the old U.S. Custom House on Route 6A in Barnstable Village, and he's been serving as its vice president for the past 10 years. Buck will also include some Coast Guard wireless communication history and how it's used today. He'll demonstrate a couple of artifacts, including a World War II-era life raft portable emergency radio. During a 26-year Coast Guard career, Buck's assignments included deck watch officer aboard a Coast Guard cutter, liaison to the USAF Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Service, and Coast Guard liaison to the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. Bulk of his tours were as rescue helicopter pilot and included tours in San Diego, Kodiak, Alaska, and 2 tours on Cape Cod. After retiring from the Coast Guard, Buck worked as an information technology specialist and project manager for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And he's a 1972 graduate of the United States Coast Guard Academy. Following his presentation, Buck will answer your questions. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Buck Baley.
Hi. Thank you. I appreciate everybody coming out, and those of you that are on Zoom. This is my first Zoom presentation, so I appreciate you dialing in too. In particular, my daughter Candace and my grandson Quinn. Hi. Okay. When I was a young lieutenant, a young Coast Guard officer, trying to come up with briefings to do briefings, one of the best suggestions that I had from a mentor is when you start with a blank page, the best thing to do for your outline is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, okay? So that's what I'm going to do. So this is the part where I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. There's a lot to cover here. I have a tendency to talk fast, so I apologize in advance for that. I'm not going to make you an expert on any one of these subjects, but hopefully it'll spark your interest and potentially get you to ask some questions or look at it a little bit further. There is no quiz at the end. Okay, but please hold your questions to the end. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Coast Guard really briefly and why we at the Coast Guard Heritage Museum have been promulgating this at Massachusetts as the birthplace of the Coast Guard. We're also going to talk about old but innovative uses of wireless communications in search and rescue. If you don't know these acronyms, I'll explain them to you later. One is LORAN, one is AMBER, and the other is a portable emergency radio that was used some time ago. And then at the end, I'm going to do a little advertisement. I'm going to give you a quick picture tour of the museum and talk about a couple of things from there. So let's start out. Coast Guard 101. We start down here in 1790 with the Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury. If you remember during the Revolutionary War, a lot of the goods and stuff that were being smuggled into the United States to avoid, here's that ugly word, tariffs, that we didn't want to pay tariffs to the British. Well, around 1790, after the country was established, Congress decided, hey, we kind of need that money now. So they imposed their own tariffs on goods imported into the United States. But a lot of people that already were pretty good at smuggling goods in. So Alexander Hamilton, needing to build up the Treasury, went to George Washington and he recommended that we establish 20 cutters, sailing ships that were basically a small navy that had a law enforcement mission along the 10 colonies to intercept these smugglers and collect tariffs on them. Thus, the Revenue Cutter Service was born, 10 cutters. So that was 1790. That was the basis of the Coast. we carry our history all the way back to the Revenue Cutter Service in 1790. Which, oh, by the way, another little tidbit of information. Of course, the Continental Navy was disbanded after the Revolutionary War because Congress decided we didn't need a standing Navy. It was reauthorized in about 1796, 1797. So that makes the Coast Guard, i.e. coming from the Revenue Cutter Service, the nation's oldest continuous naval force. Okay, okay, so that's where our law enforcement mission came. The life-saving service was established in 1871. They started with the typical boat stations that you see and the rescue carts to rescue people stranded at sea. That was our STAR mission in 1871. Those two agencies combined in 1915 to become the U.S. Coast Guard. That's also when the law was passed that we would go under the Department of the Navy during time of war, which we've only done for World War I and World War II. So that established our name as the Coast Guard. In 1939, Aids to Navigation, that was a lighthouse service, came under the auspices of the Coast Guard as well. So that's our ATON mission. In 1946, the Bureau of Marine Inspection came in. That was our marine safety mission. And then since then, we've added missions in addition to that. We started out in the Department of Treasury in 1790. In 1967, we were incorporated under the new Department of Treasury. And then in 2003, after 9/11, we're incorporated into Homeland Security. Okay, so let's talk about these three primary missions. Boston Light was first lit in 1716. That was the first lighthouse in the United States, and it's been pretty much continuously lit. It was actually the last, I can't say manned, personally staffed lighthouse until just a couple of years ago when Sandy Snows retired. In 1783, it was rebuilt. 1789, it became part of the U.S. Lighthouse Service under the Department of Treasury. In 1790, the Boston Light was ceded to the federal government. Okay, and then in 1939, as I mentioned before, the U.S. Lighthouse Service transferred to the Coast Guard. So therefore, we can carry our lineage to the Aids to Navigation mission all the way back to Boston Light in 1716. Okay, let's talk about the search and rescue mission. In 1716, the oldest life-saving organization in the United States was formed as the Humane Society of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This was headed by some of the early founding fathers in Boston, including James Bowdoin, who was the governor at the time and later established Bowdoin College. They were concerned about all the accidents and the marine disasters and casualties that were occurring around Massachusetts coast, primarily around the Cape. So their original idea was to set up caches, different points along the shore, so that a capsized vessel, the survivors would come ashore, they would have a cache, like a little hut they could get into to get out of the weather, have a little stove and some wood in there and some food and some water. So that's when they first did that in 1807. They had a little problem with it being pilfered and things like that. So later, in 1807, they constructed the first shore-based unit. And you can see in this map over here where a lot of those stations were. These were volunteers. They're off-duty fishermen, carpenters, and the like. And they only got paid when they actually rescued somebody. So that's where the term came, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back, okay? And then in 1871, based on a model of this and a model of the Royal British Life-Saving Humane Society, then the U.S. Life-Saving Service was established. Even in 1871, the Life-Saving Service and the Rescue Coordination Center had a lot of overlap, and the cutters from the Revenue Cutter Service were doing rescues, and they were helping the life-saving station with their mission and training and all. So again, in 1915, those two were combined to become the Coast Guard. So therefore, we carry our search and rescue mission all the way back to 1716. Okay, and this is the third one. This is our law enforcement mission. Again, the Coast Guard was established as a Revenue Cutter Service in 1790 as a naval law enforcement to collect tariffs. The first cutter that was commissioned and operated was in 1791, and it was a cutter, Massachusetts, out of Newburyport. So therefore, and then again, the Revenue Cutter Service was combined with the Life Saving Service in 1915 to become the Coast Guard. So our law enforcement mission goes all the way back to 1790 in Massachusetts. Okay, so this kind of just depicts the Revenue Cutter Service started in Newburyport. The U.S. Lighthouse Service basically started at Boston Light, and then the U.S. Life Saving Service along the coast of eastern Massachusetts. In the State House, in the Great Hall, is a number of large paintings that depict that represent all the military services, except for the Coast Guard. I don't think the Space Force has one either. But anyway, in about 2003, there was space set aside for a Coast Guard painting. It was kind of got lost in the shuffle or whatever. But recently, in the last couple of years, there's been an ad hoc committee put together of retired Coasties, legislators, art history and historians, people from the Massachusetts Humane Society, and they've commissioned a painting, an 8x8 color oil painting, to be put in this area to depict Massachusetts as the birthplace of the Coast Guard. And this painting up here on the right is a colored depiction of it, and you'll see that the boat has the name, the Humane Society of Massachusetts, on it, so it represents that early search and rescue mission. The sailing vessel in the upper left is a depiction of the the Revenue Cutter Massachusetts, which is our law enforcement mission, and of course Boston Light in the back is the aids to navigation. And oh, by the way, if you see to the right of the bow of the boat there, that little bump there, that represents the State House, to kind of put it in perspective. So, the painting has been commissioned. We have an artist. And we hope to have it unveiled and on display this fall. It's about a $300,000 project. And this is some of the committee here, and this depicts exactly where it's going to be and how large it's going to be in the State House. It's going to be pretty cool. Okay, let's talk about some old but innovative wireless communications technology that the Coast Guard has used in the past. The first I want to talk about is LORAN-A. This is a long-range navigation system. LORAN is a hyperbaric radio navigation system using land-based radio transmitting and receiver to determine if, well, I tell you what, I'm not going to read this because I don't understand half of it anyway. But I tell you what, let's have this guy explain it to you. Where is he?
Operating 24 hours a day, numerous nations maintain a network of LORAN transmitting stations to service the major shipping lanes. There are a pair here, for example, Sisconset and Bodie Island. One is known as the master station, the other is the slave. For a moment, consider these two stations operating as a synchronous pair, simultaneously emitting short pulses of radio energy. Leaving both shore stations simultaneously, a pair of pulses travel out into space, in all directions, at a constant speed, roughly 186,000 miles per second, or the speed of light. Plus, the pulse from the closer station will reach the ship an instant before the pulse from the other station. The LORAN ship board gear measures this difference in time of arrival in millionths of a second, or microseconds. It simply determines how much longer one pulse takes to reach the ship than the other pulse. Now, this same time interval will be observed at many points within the range of the two shore stations. And when connected, these points form a hyperbola, known as the LORAN line of position. To aid the navigator in obtaining a fix, specially prepared LORAN tables and charts contain accurately plotted lines of position on the various time differences encountered in a particular area. Having one line of position, we then obtain readings from another pair of stations. An accurate fix is established at the intersection of the two lines of position.
Okay, pretty innovative. Now that he's kind of given the basis, let me show you. This is a very simplified Loran chart, okay, of the coast. This is one set of transmitters, the master station and then a slave. And these lines, where's my, I don't know if my cursor went. Okay, these lines that radiate out are those Loran lines of positions. Those represent the number of microseconds that the device records from the time the first pulse for the first transmitter hits the station and the second pulse hits the station. So you'll notice this line is the 3600 microsecond line. This is the 3300 microsecond line. So if you get a reading of 3300, you could be anywhere on this line. So we need another reading in order to determine exactly where on that line we are. You'll notice this is a little unusual, that the closer you get to the slave station, the smaller the gap is. And the reason for that is the stations don't transmit simultaneously. The master station sends out its pulse first, and the slave sends out its pulse second. So no matter, and they're designed that way with a certain pulse difference to start with, so that you always receive the master signal first and then the slave. So it makes it a lot simpler, to determine exactly what the time difference is. Okay, so given these two stations, our theoretical navigator figures out that we're on the 3300 line here. That 2H4 is the station. He knows which stations, which set of transmitters to listen to. So we're somewhere along that 3300 line. So then what he does is he tunes to the second set of stations, happens to be this master and this slave here, and that's now we're looking at these set of lines, okay? And based on that, he takes his reading, he determines he's on the 1600 microsecond line, but he doesn't know where. Where those two lines cross is where his position is, okay? Clear as mud, right? This is the 1940s. We're dealing with this. This is pretty cool in 1940. Now, you're going to get readings that are, say, like 3,500 and 1650 or something like that. So the navigator has to interpolate between those charts, between those lines. Okay, here's the device that they started with. This is an APN4 receiver. It consumes 260 watts at either 80 or 115 volts. Frequencies are 1.7 to 8 megahertz in four different bands. So that's where all the different towers are in there someplace, the transmitters. The receiver is 9 inches high by 19 inches deep by 9 inches high. The receiver is this box over here, okay? The indicator, which is this one here with the oscilloscope, is 9 inches wide, 19 inches deep, and 13 inches high. Together, they weigh 75 pounds. Think about your GPS today and your little handheld thing, okay? Not only that, they contain 42 vacuum tubes, okay? You put this thing in an airplane or on a ship, walking around. I had a friend that was, I flew with in the Coast Guard, was an AT in the 70s. We had these. It was a slightly updated model of this, but basically it was the tube version. And their way of troubleshooting was to put it on the bench, put power to it, take off the cover, and go around and tap all the tubes to see which one they could get a reaction out of, okay? The range of this was 700 miles during the day, about 1,400 at night. That's because of the signal at night would bounce off the ionosphere, or the E layer at night, similar to ham radios skip would be. About 4,300 of these were used by the military from 1943 to 45. A smaller version, this one down below here, was APN9 was developed. It was used primarily for aircraft that combined both the receiver and the indicator, had a smaller oscilloscope with a magnetic lens on it so that you could read it. It only weighed 40 pounds and only had 35 vacuum tubes. Okay, about 7,200 of these were used. Okay, I'm going to walk you through this real quick. This is speeded up 3 times. So this is how you take a fix on this thing. First off, the navigator has to use a DR plot to figure out where he is on the chart, so he knows which stations to tune into, okay? So based on that, he tunes into the frequencies, and he gets these pulses. The first pulse is the ground wave. The second pulse is the first bounce off the ionosphere, and the third one is a rebound. So normally he takes the second one, and I believe the second line is the second pulse, okay, that's coming in. So the top one would be the master, the other one would be the slave, and then he matches them up to make sure that they're exactly right. And then, so that they're totally lined up. And then later models would read out the time difference. But in here, he has to use these different modes to kind of zoom in on to figure out exactly what the time is. So each one of those blips represents a certain number or a decimal of microseconds that he puts together to come up with that Loran position, that line of position based on the time difference. Plus, he has to calculate the addition of the additional time delay from the master to the slave, okay? And he has to do that twice, at least twice, if not 3 times, okay? But it's still a lot faster than doing a celestial nav, which was the only other option at that time. So this is a little messy, but this is what Loran charts look like. And I have one up here if you want to take a look at it. The one on the left is obviously around Hawaii. This is the 2L54 lines. Those stations are pretty far apart away from the position because the lines are pretty much parallel. So that's one set of lines. Here's the 2L5 lines that you'll see I think we figured out that the master for that is right here, okay, and then the slave is up there someplace, okay. This is the 2L4, which it looks like the slave is here and the master is actually over here. Now again, these radiate out, so you can receive these up to 700 miles during the day and 1,400 during the night. So you could be that far offshore with no signs and have it totally cloudy. You can't take a celestial nav, and you can pinpoint your location. There's actually a 4th line in here too, as well. This one's got 2 of them. This I think it's 3L0. And then a 1L3 there. One of the master station you can see is on Nantucket there. Great way to navigate. Okay, so I'm going to give you the summary. This was first introduced in 1940. This is cool technology in 1940. Used the difference of the arrival of the pulses from multiple receivers, measured that distance. That gives you that line of position. Some of the benefits required no transmissions from the receiving station. So you got a ship or a plane out there, he doesn't have to transmit. He's only receiving. Developed during World War II primarily for long-range bombers. Okay, up until then, all they had was visual or celestial navigation. A few minutes to get an accurate fix with this system compared to over 20 minutes with celestial navigation, assuming you could see the stars of the sun. Accurate positions up to 700 miles during the day and 1,400 at night. Completely independent, almost completely independent of the weather. Some, local thunderstorms and stuff would affect the receiver. There's some pictures of some of the Loran stations. Limited to friendly allies with appropriate charts and tables only. So the charts and tables were classified. The radio, I mean, the enemy could pick up the signals, but they didn't know what they were listening to, and they couldn't use them. Not dependent on a compass, chronographer, or any other radio sets that are on the ship. Totally independent. The receiver antenna was a simple long wire. In 1945, they published a list of the 10 most important innovations, primarily associated with winning the war, and Loran A was number 5. Okay. Loran C was introduced in the late 50s. It used a lower frequency for longer ranges and more accuracy. And normally, by that time, they had it so it could read out either the line of the position or sometimes your actual latitude and longitude. In its heyday, the Coast Guard staffed 49 different stations worldwide for these transmitters and monitoring stations. That was normally a tour for a second tour for a graduate of the Coast Guard Academy, so it'd be a young Lieutenant JG, 24, 25. He'd be command of 15 to 25 people out in the remote places, some remote island in the Pacific, they were really, most of them were really isolated. There was a bunch on the States as well as in the Midwest. Another interesting fact is Coast Guard, they also had monitoring stations that were staffed by people that would monitor the transmissions and the frequency and stuff to make sure that they were transmitting appropriately and accurately. There was one at Chatham, the Coast Guard station at Chatham during World War II. In fact, it was staffed by Coasties, men, and during the war, those men needed to be overseas, so it switched over and was totally staffed by Coast Guard spars, which was our women's reserve. Totally top secret. They ran the whole place during the war. Interesting story. There's a lady named Anita Eldridge that volunteered from Chicago, that volunteered to be the spars, was shipped to Cape Cod. Didn't know what Cape Cod was, didn't know what a lighthouse was, had never been to a lobster bake or anything. She sat down with these other women and couldn't tell anybody what she was doing. So she has interesting stories. She ended up actually marrying a local Eldridge, as she said, a local boy, and served the rest of her life here. A number of years ago, before she passed away, the Chatham Historical Society did an interview with us, very good, that we have on audio tape at the museum. It's really interesting. Okay, so that's Loran A. Oh, operation ceased in 2010. However, there's talk about bringing it back in some form because of the vulnerability of the GPS satellite systems. So, okay. Okay, let's talk about another system. You're probably all familiar with this kind of traditional law of the sea. Any captain of a vessel that becomes aware of another vessel at sea is traditionally required to render assistance if he can do it safely without endangering his ship or his crew or his passengers. This was coded into law in 1982 in the UN Convention Law of the Sea. So basically it says if you're near a disaster and you know about it, you have to take every effort to help, which makes sense. The question is, how do you know if you're near a disaster? And if you're somebody trying to coordinate a rescue, how do you know what vessels are nearby, okay? Well, the Coast Guard came up with this idea called the Automated Mutual Assistance Vessel Rescue System, or AMBER, okay? It's established in 1958. It was developed in response to increased maritime disasters aboard ship and the need to help coordinate those types of rescues. It utilizes ship reporting systems, primarily using wireless radio, of participating vessels. They voluntarily report their position to the AMBER system. The AMBER basically does a DR plot of where these vessels are, and when a call comes in, it gives us what they call a surface pic of what vessels are near to the distress. So these are some of the ship reports. So first off is a sailing plan. Any of you guys boaters? Okay. If you're boaters, you should be doing a sailing plan. It's the same as the FAA flight plan, only it's for boats. You don't give it to the FAA or the Coast Guard, you give it to your significant other to tell them who you are, the identification of the boat, where you're going, when you're going to be back, what port you're going to leave from, what port you're going to come back from, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how many times we get calls at the Rescue Coordination Center. My husband went out fishing. He's supposed to be back by dark. It's 10 o'clock now. Can you go find him? Okay. What's the name of his boat? I don't know. How big is the boat? I don't know. Where did he leave from? I don't know. So this is what the sailing plan is used for. I used to tell my daughter I didn't want to follow her around everywhere she was going, but she's got to tell me where she's going to go, where she's going to be, and when to get back, so that if she doesn't come back, I know where to start to look. Okay, that's what sailing plans are for. They also report their position every 24 hours after they leave port. The deviation report they submit if they deviate from their sailing plan, and a final arrival report. This is all sent to the AMBER Center. Okay, so how do they get there? All right. So the ship puts these reports, either voice, this is 1958, remember, so it's voice, teletype, Morse code, okay? And they transmit it to either one of the Coast Guard stations or other shore stations that they can reach, or maybe one of the Coast Guard ocean stations that used to be out in the middle of the Pacific and the Atlantic all year round. Those reports then are transferred to the Amber Center in Governor's Island actually started in Manhattan, but it moved to Governor's Island. I don't know if anybody knows, but Governor's Island was owned by the Coast Guard up until like the 90s. It was our central eastern Coast Command. Okay, so remember, this is 1958. So what happens is these reports comes in by teletype, more than likely from one of the ships or one of the radio stations. It's given to a watch officer that reviews it, make sure that it's good. Give it to a teletype operator, to a key punch operator that produces key punch cards. How many people remember key punch cards? Oh, all right, okay. Key punch cards then are fed into a brand new IBM 305 Raymac computer system. We'll talk about this in a minute, which goes on, believe it or not, magnetic disk, okay? This is 1958. The IBM Raymac computer system, it stood for a random access method of accounting and control. Up until then, everything was by tape, and it was serial. This is the first use of magnetic disk. You guys, first used in 1957, it operated using vacuum tubes and weighs over a ton, okay? Required a 30 by 50 foot room, okay? It was the first use of random access disks. Everybody remembers, most people remember the little 3.5 inch discs. Before that, the 5 inch floppy disk. Before that, 8 inch discs, okay? This was before that. This thing had 350 24 inch magnetic discs, okay? There was a bunch of them. No one needed a big room. It stored the equivalent of 64,000 punch cards or, wait for it, 10 megabytes of data. That's about the equivalent of a 3-minute MP3 today, right? So absolutely amazing at the time, though. This machine leased for $3,200 a month in 1958 was about $36,000 today. Man, I could buy a good gaming computer for that. Let me tell you that. Okay. Okay, so here's what happened when the vessel actually gets in distress. They make a radio call to the nearest shore station, giving their position and their identification. That then goes by landline to the Rescue Coordination Center. The Coast Guard had a number of them on either coast and along the Gulf. All nations pretty much had a similar system. They're responsible for coordinating the federal response to the disaster, to the distress. So they have Coast Guard units, military units that they would dispatch. If it's offshore and in a position where they couldn't get somebody real quick, they would request from Amber what they call a surface pick. In other words, Amber, tell me any ships that are close to this distress. So that request goes to Amber, okay? And then it goes back to the key punch operator that then codes it into key punch cards, which then goes into the IBM Raymac computer system, which produces more key punch cards with the results of the search, which goes into a card sorter, and finally, we go to the next page. You get more punch cards out of that with the sorted results, which then fed into a card to tape reader, which produces a teletype tape. Anybody remember those? Okay. Which goes into the teletype machine, which then goes out to the Coast Guard radio stations, which then attempt to radio contact the ships that are in distress and divert them. That was pretty cool back then. Okay, so quick summary. Established in '58, expanded to global coverage in 1971. They used shipboard wireless radio to collect the data, the computer to sort it, determine what ships were near the distress, and then send it out. Again, that computer's calculating all these DR positions and where they would be based on these reports that it's getting in all the time. The IBM mainframe, it stored the data for the ship reports, calculated the projected positions, finds the predicted, and then lets the RCC know. Okay. Amber is still in existence today. This is a type of SIRPIC that it produces now, and this is like a PC version of it written out. Obviously, the information highway has substantially revamped it using global email, internet, SATCOM, and GPS for the reports and all. They developed a customized communications ship management software for the system that basically plugs into a $300 PC on the captain's desk there that does all the automated reports and stuff. Primarily, they needed to do that because a lot of the ships no longer have full-time radio operators. Today, over 22,000 ships from hundreds of nations are in the system. An average of 7,000 ships are plotted every day. So they're tracking 7,000 ships, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, processing over 14,000 reports a day. Since 2000, they estimate about 2,800 lives have been saved as a result of the system, and over 15,000 since its inception. Now you can find out everything I told you and more on the internet. This is Amber's site. You can actually request a surface pick. You can enroll, find out all about. They have awards, you know, and all kinds of things. So this is a system that has stuck around and paying for itself. Okay, one third little wireless capability here. How many are familiar with EPIRBs? Okay, all right, good. Even though you're not boaters, that's good. Every boater should have. Every boater, like I say, anybody that has a boat who goes out where the water is deeper than the length of the boat should have one of these, okay? This is a typical one. It's water or manually activated, okay? It transmits identification and GPS, so if you programmed it right, which is you use your phone to Bluetooth to it, and you put in there who you are, who your next of kin is, who to contact, identification and description of your boat, everything about your boat and stuff. And it connects to the GPS. It has a little GPS in it, so it gathers all that information. When it's activated, it transmits that via satellite to one of the rescue coordination centers automatically. This particular model actually gets an acknowledgement message back. I think a little LED lights to indicate that your message has been received. It also transmits a signal, a warble signal on 121.5, which is the international distress signal for aircraft, so aircraft can hear it if they're in the area. And the Coast Guard and rescue aircraft have the capability to direction find DF to locate that signal when they get within line of sight of it. Okay, has an IR and an LED strobe light. It floats, good thing. Okay, has a 10-year battery life. Costs about $740 on Amazon, okay? And it's 18 inches tall, including the antenna, a little over four inches wide, and a little less than 2 pounds. Okay, that's what you have today. This is what you had in the 1950s. This is the latest thing, okay? This is the Mackie 401A portable lifeboat radio. You would have this in your lifeboat. It floats, which I think is pretty amazing in itself. Okay, it transmits on 500 kilohertz and 8.364 megahertz. International distress calling things, but you have to know Morse code to do it. Okay, and this is the little Morse code key here. All right. Hand crank dynamo, you see the crank on that one? And this side that goes, I guess it does have it. Yeah, this one actually has a crank on both sides too, I think. So it puts out 1 to 2 watts of power. Remember your old $39.99 Radio Shack walkie-talkies put out 5 watts, right? So, okay. Have a long line antenna. I think at one point they had like a helium balloon that they would put the line on, but the antenna attacks it right here, stringing out. Try and get it up in the air. It has a receiver here. You can receive 8.3 to 8.7 megahertz, and it actually had a little set of earphones here, so you could hear incoming calls in Morse code, but you couldn't transmit. Used from 1953 to the 1970s. This thing was 17 inches tall, 13 inches deep, and 11 inches wide, and weighs 41 pounds. I know, because I brought it in here tonight. Okay, compare that to what you have over there. See, pretty cool, pretty amazing. All right, that's my 3 technical marvels of the early wireless age. Okay, the dealing with search and rescue. I'll talk real quickly about the Coast Guard Heritage Museum. As Rob mentioned, we're located in the village of Barnstable, just up from the courthouse on 6A, in the old Customs House. This was the Customs House is an artifact in itself, built in 1856. In the 70s, it was put on the historical registry. The customs officer was upstairs. The post office was downstairs until the 70s. We surmised that the customs officer could see, his office was in the upper right window. We know that because that's where he kept the money. There's this big, huge safe there, okay? And we surmised that he could see all the ships coming into Barnstable, as well as he could probably see the tall ships leaving Boston going around Provincetown. It's the first fireproof building on the Cape, probably because he worked out of his house before and it was burned down 2 or 3 times, okay? But pretty cool. This is just a quick visual tour. This is one of our nice docents at the desk. They'll greet you coming in, take your money. We charge a small nominal fee. This boat over here is the Campbell. This is the 5-foot model that a guy, a retired cook, made for us. He's made 95% of the models that we have. He spent 25 years off and on building this thing. It's all done from original parts and stuff, and it's amazing. And we have three or four of these in the building. He's just an expert model building. So we started out again with the Revenue Cutter Service, which we trace our origins back. The Life-Saving Service, everybody's familiar with the Pendleton Rescue in 1952 and Bernie Weber and the movie The Finest Hours. Everybody's nodding, okay? This could be called the AKA Bernie Weber Museum, okay? We do have a nice display on the Pendleton there. So this is a display on the high endurance cutters. These were the cutters that were out in the middle of the Atlantic and Pacific to provide navigation, weather reporting, search and rescue up until the 80s. When I was out there and the planes were coming over, they were using Doppler navigation at the time. We'd have a certain code we send out in the radio saying which grid we were in. We had a 60 by 60 nautical mile grid we had to be in. We'd come over, the airplane would fly right over us. They'd talk to us on the radio. We got to talk to the stewardesses, and they would say, "You're squawking in, you're in Alpha Foxtrot. We show you in Bravo 3." So no, we know exactly where we are. Wait till they get out of sight, and then we update our position. This is the last operational beach cart. They brought these down to the beach to do rescue of vessels that were grounded offshore. The last time this was used is 1962, the rescue of the Margaret Rose fishing vessel off of Provincetown. And you know who the officer in charge of that rescue was? Bernie Weber. You got a medal for that too. We have a selfie studio. You want to bring your grandkids? This is upstairs in the customs officer's office there. We cover lighthouses and light ships. This light on the left there was actually one of 2 lights that was on the Vineyard light ship that was in Vineyard, was sank in the hurricane in 1944. It was later found in the 60s using this brand new device called sonar. And they recovered that light. This is a section on women in the Coast Guard, also small boats and patrol boats. Large section on Coast Guard at the war. Coast Guard has been involved in every naval conflict we've had since the War of 1812, right up to the Desert Storm in the Middle East. We still have combat vessels over there now. We no longer, like I said, only during World War I and World War II did we actually come under the Department of the Navy. Now we chop particular assets there. We like to call the Coast Guard that small nucleus around which the Navy forms in time of war. Okay, my favorite section, aviation, a lot of models. The first continuous operational Coast Guard air station was in Massachusetts as well. Anybody know where 10-Pound Island is? Anybody know where Gloucester is? It's a little tiny 3 or 4 acre island in the middle of Gloucester, and we flew biplane seaplanes off of there for about 5 years. And they moved to Salem, and from Salem, they branched out to Quonset. They had a unit in Quonset as well as Salem, and in 1970 they moved down to Cape Cod. And it's also a display on our Coast Guard astronauts. Anybody know how many Coast Guard astronauts we have? 2. 2 have flown. A third one just got selected for training. So one of them happened to be a classmate of mine. Another one is a past resident of Cape Cod here. So you can find all that out here. All right. And of course we have the proverbial gift shop. We'd be more than happy to take your money. So we sublease the buildings from the town, and includes what we refer to as the campus, which is an active blacksmith shop who's normally open when we're open, and the jail. The jail is the oldest wooden jail in the country. And it was moved here in the 70s. We sublease it to the Barnstable Historical Society, and they usually have somebody on the weekends there. But if you really want to see it, and we're not very busy, we can open it for you, okay? All volunteer staff. Most of us are retired coasties or veterans, but we have a number of civilians that help us. We're always looking for help, either as docents, helping us with publicity, our newsletter, IT stuff, any radio stuff, I think. But if anybody's interested and you got extra time and you're interested, I'm more than happy to help. We have a real need for somebody to help us with our gift shop and also with our artifact inventory. We have a whole basement full of artifacts that need to be cataloged and all. Or you can do painting if you like, okay? Okay, this is my last slide. I would reference our website. Again, we're a 401(c) operation. Our operations funding primarily comes from donations. We do a donation drive in the fall and then a membership drive in the springs. If you go to the website, you can become a member. You can also donate directly to us, and also there's a link. You can also donate to the State House painting project as well, if you're interested. Also, you can sign up for our newsletter. This is a great newsletter. We call it a quarterly newsletter that we put out about 3 times a year, and it's really good. We promise you not to spam your email, but what we will do is when it's published, we'll post it on the website and send you a link to it and get you notified. And additionally, we have a Facebook page, which makes another thing. We're also looking for a public affairs person to help with our media face. So that's all I have. Questions? Did I make it time?
Little over, but really good.
So, question, did you say you were involved in the helicopter service also of the Coast Guard?
Yeah, the question was I involved in helicopters? Yeah, I graduated from the academy, spent about 18 months on a 355-foot World War II era. Basically started out as a destroyer escort, sitting out in the North Atlantic 30 days at a time. And when the helicopter came out one time to pull an injured seaman off, and I knew he was going to be back home for dinner, I thought, that's what I want to do. So I did. I have about 3,600 hours in the H-3, which is a big twin-engine helicopter stationed in. Originally started out in San Diego, then went to Kodiak, and then had 2 tours at Cape Cod here.
If anybody at home has any questions, also please put them in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to pass those along as well.
Yes, sir.
You talked about the original Amber's process. How long did it take from the time you got a distress call till you sorted out and went back to the station to say, I think there's a couple of ships that are out there?
Okay, so you're talking about the Amber process, how long it takes once you request a surface pick.
Yeah.
I was involved in a few rescues, and it could take 4 or 5 hours. It took a while before we finally get the information back and start contacting ships. Any others?
So I have a question. How much power did the Loran Earth stations or source stations actually use?
That's a good question. I really don't know. I know. You saw some of the pictures of the stations, and they were full of electronic gear and tubes, and stuff. So, and they had that. It was only a pulse, but it was timed specifically and would reach 700, 1,400 miles. They were very tall, very, very tall antennas. I've flown to a couple of the stations, and they're 200 or 300 feet high.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Rob,
yes, ma'am.
if the Coast Guard rescues people off of a ship, do they do that for free, or do they charge the ship?
No, yeah. So the question is, does the Coast Guard charge for its services,
Yeah.
basically? No, and I appreciate you paying your taxes so that we get paid. Now, there are certain instances. When I first got in, we had a problem with. We used to send when somebody ran out of fuel. They got lost and ran out of fuel. We'd send a boat out that would fuel them out. Unfortunately, we had a number of fishermen that would go out as far as they could do with a tank of gas, fish all day and then call an emergency. They ran out of gas, and we'd go out and get them. Well, they changed that in the late 70s or early 80s and started charging for that. If it's determined that it was due to gross negligence, then we will take them to court and try and charge for them. If it's a false alarm, we find somebody with a false alarm, or it's gross negligent. But normally, no, there's no fee.
That also became an issue with the Coast Guard Auxiliary at one point, because there is a commercial outfits like Boat US that go out and do these kinds of services for a fee. And so the auxiliary would have boats on patrol, and there were some tension between the auxiliary, which of course would do it at no charge, as opposed to Boat US, which would charge a fairly hefty fee. And so there was a sort of the dividing situation where if it wasn't an emergency, that Boat US would be called on to deal with it, and the auxiliary would stand back.
Any other questions?
So is the Coast Guard base here now, besides the little one down in Chatham, where's the headquarters here, and what does Otis Air Base have, what's its role?
Okay, Otis now, originally it was, in 1970, the air station came down, was a tenet of the Air Force. Since the Air Force has left, although they have an Air National Guard unit there, the Coast Guard, I think, is the largest command now. But it's one of the, well, a lot of them are doing this now. It's one of the first military bases that's ruled by committee, believe it or not. Everybody has their own little section and stuff. The Coast Guard is the major command, and they have since split the air station away from the base command. So there is a base commander there that handles housing, the exchange, a number of units like the law enforcement unit, a rapid response boat unit, the range, and other capabilities and units have moved down from Boston. So that's its primary purpose. Its primary tenant is the air station. The air station manages the airport now. We contract the tower people. Now, Group Woods Hole it's actually called a Sector Southeast, and they're responsible for search and rescue, law enforcement, and ATON missions throughout Southeast Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So they're the central command for Chatham. Chatham reports to them. Providence reports to them. You see the Coast Guard cutters, the larger ones along the coastal patrol cutters, the 95s and 125s and stuff. Those are all based out of Woods Hole. So it's like a central command for Southeast Massachusetts.
We have a question from a Zoom attendee talking about bringing back Loren, and in the modern age, how would you protect the charts? How would you keep that confidential?
I imagine, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the thinking is on that. You could code the signals, or you could still classify the charts. Actually, it's all done, probably all done by computers now. So basically, you would have a secure computer that would do the calculations and stuff. You could do any number of, cryptographic systems and stuff to secure it. But even for commercial operations and stuff, you probably at least a portion of it you would want to make public as well.
It's interesting.
Could you imagine what would happen to international shipping if GPS was compromised? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anything else? Okay, thank you, Buck.
Okay, thank
Well,
you.